Hello everybody and welcome to the one-to-one autism conference. Every day in June we've been delivering content. I'm Dean Beadle. I'm an autistic speaker, singer, interset trainer and proud patron of One-to-One Enfield. Now any of you that have been watching our content over the last week will have seen all of the talks and videos that Rhi Lloyd-Williams has done for us. Hello Rhi, hope you're well. Rhi is a playwright, is a blogger. That's how I first come into contact with Rhi's work. And is the author of The Duck, which she shared an excerpt with us during this week. She also did a wonderful video for us on creativity. And all of our fabulous members, all of you guys, thank you so much for sending your questions in. You've sent in a load of questions for Rhi to answer. But first, Rhi, if you don't mind me going off script a little bit, I was just wondering how you've been coping in lockdown.
Right. I have to say, it's been up and down. It's been a bit all over the place. I started off the first few weeks with the complete change of routine. Everybody was suddenly at home. So I've got 5 children, and my eldest had just moved back in with his partner before it started. So we had 8 people in the house. So I went from most days being alone to having loads of people here all the time, having to do all the homeschooling, having to do all these things. And for the first few weeks, I just felt like constantly jittery. I couldn't concentrate on anything. I couldn't do anything for more than a couple of minutes. I just was running from one thing to the next and didn't really know how to cope with it. And then after a while, we got into a new routine. It was really important that I think we established a new routine as early as possible. And everything began to settle. Got used to it, and then I began to dread coming out of it. You know, it got to a point of worrying about that, and I think that's where I am now, because things are changing again. I'm in Wales, so the rules are only just beginning to relax here. Yeah. So we've only had shops open this week, and so it's a bit worrying. The kids are back to school next week for a day, and I mean, the other thing I did, because I couldn't concentrate on anything early on, I decided to make myself a rule that I had to write a poem every day, which I normally just wait until inspiration hits me. But this time I'm going to write one every day, and that way I will have to do something creative. And it's been really interesting reading back through them where I was, because you can sort of sense the sort of tension, and I'm quite chilled out, and then it's back. But yeah, I don't think it's been easy on anyone. I'm really lucky with where I live, because I live in the middle of nowhere, so I haven't had to worry about going out. I can go outside without seeing anybody, which is, you know, huge relief. Really lucky with that. But then I'm a long way from people. I don't have any neighbours to chat to over the fence. I don't bump into it, you know, many people during the day if I'm out on my walk. So there's that. We do still need those social things. So all right in general, but yeah, ups and downs.
In the creativity video that at the beginning you felt you should be being creative but you couldn't.
Oh yeah.
How did you and obviously you've been doing the poem every day, how did you overcome that?
I was really jealous of everybody who was at home on their own or just with a partner and had no children at home for a really long time. Not a really long time. I was aware that there were loneliness issues, but all these people suddenly had all this time to be creative, and I felt like all my creative time had gone away and I couldn't concentrate. But using poetry, I can do that in like bits and starts. So I can write a line and then run away, and I can write something really quickly, and it might be awful, it might be terrible, but I'm going to get some sense of something out of it. So choosing poetry was perfect for me, because it could be hit and run creativity. And I was having to force myself to do it sometimes. Lots of days I really didn't want to write at all. I didn't want to do anything creative. But after I did, I felt better. So I think it was making that rule was a bit of a lifesaver in a lot of ways. It was something just for me.
Yeah, and this is the thing I've been saying to people a lot, is that people are saying, oh, now you've got all this time to do all these things. And some people thrive on that. But the other thing is that to remember, I think, is that we're not in the middle of a lovely bonus bit of time off. We're in the middle of a crisis. And if you're managing to open your eyes and get out of bed, which I've done today, but I might not tomorrow, is an achievement, isn't it? And that's the point, you know, let alone external pressures to achieve things. Getting through every day is an achievement in itself, isn't it?
Yeah, we need to give ourselves a break, and we need to absolutely. There's been days where I've said, right, everybody, we're staying in pajamas today. You know, we're not, if we get through today and we're all still talking to each other, we've succeeded. If we get through today and I've been outside once for 5 minutes, total achievement.
Yeah.
You know, keeping your expectations of yourself really low and the focus being health and well-being. Oh my goodness, it has to be that. When it comes to the schoolwork with the kids, most of what I've been doing has just been to keep a routine, which is part of the health and well-being. They really need that routine. One of them was particularly anxious about not being at school. And now she's so much happier because she's into the new routine. She knows what she's doing every day. And it really was just that change. But yeah, we've got to look after ourselves and not have those expectations to, you have to create this beautiful work of art and you have to learn how to crochet and you have to learn how to paint and you have to learn all these wonderful skills. Great if you can, absolutely, brilliant, well done you. But if you can't, you're completely human. Well done, excellent, just keep going.
And to accept that some days, some weeks you can, and some days, some weeks you can't, and one doesn't negate the other.
Not at all.
So moving on to the fabulous questions that our members have sent in. Question 1, somebody has asked, so the theme, for those that haven't seen Rhi's videos this week, the theme of The Duck is about being a late diagnosed autistic woman. And it's a play that toured the UK for 2 years. I went to see it in Greenwich and it was phenomenal. The feedback from the autistic community has been incredible for it. Sold out just about everywhere. It was incredibly successful. And so the whole theme was about being an autistic woman. And somebody asked, how do we support the non-autistic world to recognise and acknowledge that girls can be autistic too?
It's a really great question. And I love that. I would love it if there was like really simple one thing answer. I think a lot of it is, I mean, that's one of the reasons I wrote The Duck, was because of the lack of representation for autistic girls and women. One of the reasons I didn't get diagnosed until so late was because it was a male thing. It was a male boy thing as well. It wasn't a man thing, it was a boy thing. And I didn't recognize myself in any of the descriptions of autism because they were all really stereotypical and really unhelpful. And so being a writer, when I had the opportunity to write this play, I thought, well, if it's not there, I've got to write it. We all need to share our stories. And so the more we see autistic women and girls in the media, represented in the media, that sort of thing, the more normalized it becomes and the more likely we are to actually understand what it means. And not just autistic women and girls, anyone who presents sort of atypically with autism. It's really, really important that we recognize that these stereotypes are really narrow and these ideas of who people are can be really narrow. Often when we see autism represented in films or TV, they try and shove all the aspects of autism into one person instead of creating an actual human. You get, well, we need to make sure this stereotype's in there and we need to make sure that one's in there. And it's like, well, those two things aren't necessarily in the same person. And that might be over here and this might be over here, because they really don't understand the spectrum. So when I wrote the character of the Duck, it's a version of me. It's not got all the aspects of autism. It's got my difficulties and my, skills and who I am. It's not a weird amalgamation. And that's what we need to see. We need to see that sort of honest side. I mean, I think one of the reasons that we still have such a sort of a disparity in diagnosis for girls and boys is we still have this idea of autism as a male thing. And as that gap narrows and narrows and narrows, well, until we have everyone diagnosed, you can't possibly say. So I think it's really unhelpful to talk about it, talk about the ratios between men and women, because if you don't look at autistic girls, you're not going to find them. If you don't, the more we've found, the more you look at, if you look at a classroom of children, if you look for the autistic girls in that group, you will find them. We're there. And if you don't look, you won't. If you don't consider autism, you won't be there. So there's so many sort of aspects that cause non-autistic people to not have an idea that autistic women exist, all these awful stereotypes that are unhelpful for everybody. I think the arts are just such a sneaky way to convince the population of something. So there's lots of stuff in the Duck that's quite contentious, that's quite difficult, that's quite, I'm saying some quite, uncomfortable things for people, but because it's presented in the arts, they don't feel offended or defensive, they just listen. And so I think the arts are a really, really good way of getting that information to non-autistic people so that they understand that we are everywhere. We are people. We cover the whole demographic. We are not white small boys. We are everybody.
Yeah.
We are everywhere. And that's a part, we are such an important part of humanity. Yeah.
There was something in your creativity video that I think chimes with this that was really powerful for me. You said when you got your diagnosis, it wasn't the realization that you were autistic, it was the realization that everybody else wasn't. And I think often people don't think of it from that perspective, that actually we all have our own normal, don't we? And it's only when other people's presumptions and assumptions of what supposed normality is comes into the picture that things are questioned. And it's lovely that you'd reached that stage in life without necessarily having that pressure to compare yourself to other people until then, possibly. And that was really positive to hear.
Yeah, I think it's I mean, I think a lot of the problem is that you do compare yourself to other people, but you don't know what you're comparing. But when you find out that you don't think the same as everybody, no, that they don't think the same as you.
Absolutely.
That's the important distinction. What you're really discovering is that you've misjudged people. That's what I discovered. I thought, oh, all these times when somebody's been late to meet me, and if I was late to meet somebody, it would be because I didn't really care about them, or because I didn't respect them, or actually that's who you are. And it's got, that you're coming at things from a different way. Yeah. And so it's helped me be kinder to other people. It's helped me understand other people and go, right, cannot apply my motivations to them. And I think that's really the solution to everything, isn't it? As long as you assume that everybody is coming from a good place as much as possible, it makes you a lot happier. It makes me a lot happier. It makes life a lot easier. Doesn't mean people are always nice, but in general, more people make mistakes than are genuinely horrible. And the genuinely horrible people, more than one mistake, you're heading down that road if you're continuing to do things like that. But I think it's really, really important that we are generous in our assumptions about anybody, because there's so many neurodivergencies as well that are different to mine. And as long as I come at all of them with that attitude, communication is so much easier.
And one thing I wonder out of this is that I first come into contact with Rhi through your blogs. And I remember when you first wrote them, they were anonymous blogs, and you were reasonably anonymous on social media. And then gradually, through the production of the play, you were then on stage doing Q&As afterwards. So I wonder whether, having started out writing about it anonymously to then being centre stage talking about your experiences, was that a big nervous shift thing to do?
It was actually the writing anonymously was, I hadn't even told a lot of my family at that point when I started writing about it. So I'd only been diagnosed about 6 months earlier, and then I started writing about it. And so it was really important for me that I kept that, I didn't want the world to know what my family didn't. But I did want them to know. I wanted to talk to them. I wanted to connect with them, and I wanted to share my experience. Leaping from that onto being on stage, it was, sorry, I've got a fly buzzing around me. It's too hot. Leaping from that to being on stage was a big step. It was a big shift. It was very much a part of my journey. So when I started the blog, I was processing everything. I was still working out who I was. I was trying to work out which bits were the mask, which bits were me. And the blog was a huge part of that for me. It was really, really helpful for me to share my experiences, for other people to share their experiences with me. And then I think the step to being on stage, doing the Q&As, that was a part of the end of the processing. Not the end, but the part of me really knowing who I am and being really comfortable with that. So that was that. You could probably mark that day and say that was the moment when that shift happened, which was so important for me, that I had that this was now me. I was stepping into the character I'd created, the autistic person. I'd done that, and there she was, and I was stepping into that, and that was now who I was comfortable to be.
That was very powerful to watch. And I said to Rhi when I first met her in Greenwich, I said, I remember you when you were just an earring, because your profile picture was just the side of your head, wasn't it, and your earring. And then gradually we saw your face, and then you were doing Q&As on stage, and it was just lovely to link the physical person with the voice that we'd been reading and listening to, and that was so powerful. And now moving on again to what and it links brilliantly actually that our members have sent through, is what response did you expect from the audience of The Duck, and did it surprise you, or did it exceed your expectations?
That's a great question too. It more than exceeded. It was unbelievable. When you write stuff that's so personal and you put it on stage and you've been workshopping it and working it all out and getting it all, and then you put that character on stage and you don't know what's going to come back. You don't know if all the autistic people in the audience are going to say, actually, no, that's just you. That's not an autism thing, you big old weirdo. There was definitely, I remember that sort of sitting at the back and waiting for them to just go, well, that was really, she's not autistic at all, is she? She's just, she's not even this. She's not part of this gang either. And so it was really nerve-wracking. After the first performance, a lady came up to me who I had never met before, and said, just really, really simply, you put me on stage. And for me, that was the ultimate. I'll never get a better review than that. I'll never get any better response than that. The response from everybody was just wonderful. It's been so lovely. And afterwards, people have shared their experiences with me. They've told me the things that really chimed, the things that were different. They've told me, they'll be, oh, I do that, but I don't do it like that. I do it like this. And it's just fascinating it's such a privilege. Absolute privilege to have people share their experiences with you like that. I think that's my favorite bit of any of it. I hoped that people would connect to the character. I couldn't possibly have imagined how much people would connect. And on the other side, I got non-autistic people coming up to me and saying, you've helped me understand somebody I know. I had one person, it's great, it was probably a few months after I'd one of the earlier performances. I was getting on a train in the middle of nowhere, and this woman ran up to me and she said, you're Rhi, aren't you? I saw the play and I didn't get to talk to you afterwards, but I'm not autistic, but my brother is. And we get on now. We didn't get on before, but I now understand him, and I understand how he's communicating with me, and we have a really good relationship now, and I wanted to thank you. And I was like, I couldn't have foretold that. That's magical. That's people being, making assumptions about how other people work, assuming other people work the same as them, and then finally realizing and having that realization that if people don't, that doesn't mean that they're doing things for the same reason as you. You have to re-examine things. And so definitely.
Well, it's that shift, isn't it, from awareness to understanding?
Yes.
And I think particularly in the medium of theatre, is that it creates a safe space, doesn't it, for people to examine what they think about things without feeling necessarily threatened. So you can challenge, can't you, in a way that perhaps you can't in other settings. I think that was the power of it.
Yeah, I mean, I've done talks, and I've explained what autism is, and that's helpful, and it's really, really good, and it's really powerful, and you really do get a lot across. But there's a difference between explaining it and showing it.
Yeah.
And so people, as you say, they take it in rather than criticizing it or critiquing it. They just absorb it. And it's
also when they're attending something they think is for entertainment purposes, the defences come down as well, don't they?
And I hope it is entertaining. I want it to be entertaining.
Yeah.
There's funny bits, there's sad bits. There's, I couldn't write something and there not be funny bits in it. That's humour is really important. I think that relaxes people, and humour is such a great way of connecting to other people as well. There's so many different ways we could pass these. I mean, Dean, you know, you use humour so much in your talks and things. It's such a good way of getting information across in a non-confrontational way.
Absolutely, and it takes that defence down. I always think if you can make them laugh in the first couple of minutes, then they're much more likely to take on board the point you're making, because you've built that little trust connection through humour, haven't you? And the duck did that brilliantly.
Yeah.
It was just an incredibly engaging piece of theatre. Anything that gets me sitting still for an hour is quite something. So, you know, power to you. The next question says, and again, it links on nicely, what's next? Are you going to be writing any more theatre?
I would like to at some point. I've played with a few ideas. It would be nice, but at the moment I want to work more. I'm trying to write a well, not children's book, sort of slightly older children's book, in a fantasy and silly way. And it's something I've wanted to do for a while. So I would need a bit of time to get that done and carry on with the poetry as well. I would like to write more theatre. I love writing dialogue. I love writing, you know, these long monologues as well. I love words. I love words and words spoken aloud. So powerful and so musical. And I would really enjoy doing that again at some point, but I don't have any actual plans to do it right now.
And is the children's book related in any way to the theme of autism, or is it a completely separate project?
It's a completely separate project, but I think everything I do, because I am autistic, I can't separate that from the art I do. And even if I'm not explicitly writing about autism, I'm writing autistically. So it's one of those things, you can't really escape it. And I want to be able to cover every theme. I don't want to be narrowly doing one thing at any point. I want to be able to be as expansive as any other artist. And even if it's not, you know, none of the characters are explicitly autistic, there's no way I'm getting away from that's who I'm writing. I'm writing from my experience, I'm writing from my knowledge. And so it's always going to be a mix of me in there.
That'll always filter through.
Always.
And I think the duck is going to carry on like a steam train on its own almost. You've put it out there into the world, and I think people have got such a connection with it that I think that's going to be a piece of work that continues to have a massive impact for years to come, long after you've stopped working on it directly. You know, I think
I really hope so. I really hope so. It's. I look at the duck now and I think I couldn't write it now because I'm not at that point. I was processing at that point, and that's it's, you know, you can feel that in it. It's all working through. I mean, that's what she's doing in the play. She's working through what all these things mean for her. And so I don't think I could write it now. I'd have to write something else. It would have to be something completely different. It would be great if that could take on a momentum of its own and really keep going, because it's just been a pleasure. It really has. Maybe
there's some scope in doing a 5 years down the line follow-up sequel of the duck's discovered Twitter, and she's bloody cross.
She's fuming.
And that's the next stage in that development, isn't it?
That would be great. Yeah.
Somebody here says, in your talk for us about creativity, someone says here, how did you overcome your perfectionism that you mentioned to be able to create? You said that you enjoy it, then it is perfect. How do you overcome this in your professional work that others will see and judge?
It's really hard. It's really hard. When it comes to my writing, that's the one thing I have really struggled with, my perfectionism. So I have always written. You won't have heard of me before now, but I have always written. I've always been writing books and stories and plays, and I used to end up just describing myself as I am a captor of words. I write them all down and I put them in my computer and I lock them all away for nobody to ever see them. I had a plan that I was going to use the Emily Dickinson route to getting published. Emily Dickinson is a poet, an American poet, who after she died, they found loads of poems in her house and they all got published. And I thought, I'll do that. That will be my route. Then I'll never have to deal with the consequence. And I'll never have to see anybody read them. I'll never have to get the reaction. I'll never have to deal with the critics. It'll all be great. So that wasn't a good plan. So instead, I describe myself as a recovering perfectionist, which means that for lots of things, I've managed to get rid of my perfectionism for the end product. And when it comes to writing, it's really, really hard because there is no such thing as perfect. It's not like maths. I love maths because you could be right or wrong. Art, you have to be somewhere close. It has to be right for you. So my advice for that is, don't let it stop you. Easy to say. But the main thing is, you have to write as though no one will ever read it. You have to write everything as though no one will ever read it. And it was probably the blog that freed me in that sense, because when I was writing my blog, I was anonymous. And so I could write from the heart. I could write exactly what I was feeling without having to worry about it coming back on me. I was still worried about the responses. I was still worried about whether other autistic people would say, again, weird, and just you. But that gave me the freedom. And as I wrote more and more, and people were really nice about what I was writing, and they were sharing it and responding to it, I, again, let that guide me. So I was able to use that to give me the confidence to step out. There's no one route past perfectionism. What you have to do is, because it's really useful. That's the other thing. It's really, really useful. If you're a perfectionist, you want it to be right. You care. You want it to be good. And if somebody doesn't care, they're not going to be good. So it's this amazing driving force until it stops you from sharing it. Yeah. So you write from your heart. You write exactly what you want to write as though nobody is ever, ever, ever going to read it. And then you look at it again and you decide, when you're editing, you decide what you're actually comfortable with people reading. Yeah. And once you've got to that point of, I'm comfortable with what people are reading, I feel this is as good as I can do, it still has the original thing, then you have to take that step. And that's really, really, really hard. And it's particularly hard when you're autistic and you have to put yourself in a position of having to do all these interactions that are exhausting, even if you weren't also having to hand somebody your heart. Yeah. So it's not easy. And I think we need to work towards autistic ways of doing things as well, being able to share things through autistic networks, which is not there yet, but hopefully one day we'll be able to think about how we network in autistic ways better. There are, artists already thinking about doing it. Sonia Bouet has been trying to build sort of autistic art networks, which are fantastic, and people are learning more and we're getting closer. Perfectionism is a constant challenge, a constant help, and it's something that never goes away, and it never gets easy, but it gets easier the more you do it. Show something a little bit, so show somebody a small amount of what you've got, build it up, build up your confidence, listen to what people are saying in criticism when you can, but do it according to your own levels and what you can do. It's a great question. There's no set answer because it's such an individual thing, but the whole, feel the fear and do it anyway is the only way to get through it. It gets easier.
And in terms of artistic, easy to say, networking, John Adams has been doing a lot of work with Flow Observatorium as well.
Of course he has,
He's pushing to create a sort of artistic hubs and safe spaces for autistic people to network, to create in non-judgmental environments. And they're doing some fab work there as well. I think I can relate to what you were saying about the whole perfectionism thing, and that if it comes from the heart, it has that power and it really matters to you, and you want it to be as perfect and as polished as it can be when it's delivered to the person that's hearing it. As a speaker, as a singer, those things obsess me too. But one thing that really helps is I always try and remind myself, and it doesn't always work, I try and remind myself that what you hear when you deliver something is different to what the audience hears when they receive it. And very often I've come off stage after a talk thinking that did not go well, and it's the best reviewed talk of the year. We're not always the best judges, are we, of what? Because we're more inclined to see the perfections.
We are so critical to ourselves. How I speak to myself, I would never speak to anyone else like that. We are horrible to ourselves. If you're a perfectionist, you know that internal voice that says, this is rubbish, this is awful, this is terrible. Why are you even trying? Why are you doing this? And you have to shut that down and ignore it, because if you wouldn't speak to someone else like that, well, how dare you speak to yourself like that? I'm going to be offended on your behalf. How dare you say that to yourself?
It was the other day, I read something on Facebook that changed my life. It was Emma Dalmain put a post up about depressive meltdowns, and I'd never heard of this term. And I read through it, and it was that whole spiral of I'm rubbish, I'm useless, I'm rubbish, I'm useless, and how quickly it can spiral you down. And I felt it happening to me the other day. I bought my partner a crochet your own Ron Weasley set. And I rang him and I said, I've got you this. And he said to me, well, I'm not going to crochet that. It'd be more romantic if you made it for me. Funny that. So I sat up the other night and I thought, I've never crocheted in my life, but I thought, I've got the capacity to crochet. And so I sat down and opened up this booklet. And it was literally another language, DCSTMF 6 times 8. I thought, this is mathematics as well as... And then I had to...
Oh, it is.
Do it. I gave myself 20 minutes and I managed a slip knot and I think one little coil or whatever you call them and a chain, and I thought there's no way I'm going to make a little stuffed teddy like this, and I felt it happening. You're rubbish, you're useless, you're rubbish. And I said to myself, no, you're not going to determine a whole life by whether you can crochet. You're not known for your crocheting. It's all right. You'll try again another day. And that whole growth mindset thing. But very easily that need to be brilliant straight away can have that spiraling effect, can't it?
It really can.
The audience is never aware of that, or the pain that's been involved in getting it to them.
No, not at all. They're completely oblivious to it. They're completely oblivious of how much of yourself you have to put into things and how hard it is, because it is genuinely hugely hard. And I have so much admiration for anybody who puts their work out there and puts themselves out there like that, because that is such strength. It's not bravery to do it unless you're terrified. Yeah.
I heard a singer being interviewed the other week, and they were talking about their massive hit album, that was the definitive thing they did. And the interviewer said, what do you think about it now? And they said, I've never listened to it since it was released because all I hear is the things I got wrong. I'd sing it differently now. And I was thinking, everybody else that's listened to that record thinks it's phenomenal, except the person that made it. And I guess the message is that the artist is not their own audience.
No, and I've certainly had that watching The Duck. There's been times when I'm sitting at the back going, why did I phrase that like that? That's an awful phrasing. Why did I put that like that? But everybody else
in the room's thinking that.
Everybody else thinking, oh, that's beautiful. And I'm going, no, it's clumsy. It's clumsy. I have to rewrite that. I'm going to have to redo it.
Stop watching this. But it's true, isn't it? We're our own worst critics.
We are. We really are.
I often say that to kids when they've had exams and they say, oh, I did really badly. And I often say to them, well, don't bank on it. You may well be surprised, because often we're our own worst critics. And often we bully ourselves. We'll pick out the one little thing and blow that out of all proportion and miss that 99% of it was quite good. It's the 1% that we didn't like that will then become definitive, won't it?
Yeah. Any mistake, that's what I'll be focusing on. Not the success, no, the mistake. Yeah. And you're right, you've got to be careful not to spiral into that.
Yeah.
It's so easy to just start focusing on that and go, actually, no, put that to one side. This bit was good. This bit worked. This is all fine. And use that to power you on, because as soon as you start listening to that voice, you just end up sinking. Yeah. You've got to keep swimming.
And what works for me is I've got a folder on my phone, and anytime someone says something nice or writes a nice comment about something I've written or done or talked about or sung or anything, I screenshot it and I put it in this little folder called Ego. And as yet, I've never had to look at it, but it's sat there in case I get stuck in that spiral. I've got, comments I can whiz through. I know that a lot of people have positivity jars and things, but just things that you can keep in that moment when your own judgment goes.
Go to the external.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's there as a backup plan anyway.
That's fab.
Never had to use it, but just knowing it's there and seeing the number of things that are in there without having to read them, just seeing it as I scroll through my pictures gives me that little reminder that maybe my own view of myself is wrong.
Yeah,
I think that's really important for anybody that creates anything.
definitely.
Moving on to, again, thank you so much to the folks that have sent questions in. They're fabulous. Someone says here, and again this links on, I struggle to get my ideas out of my head and onto the page. What helps you to do that?
Yeah, there are certainly times when it is really hard. And one of the things about writing is you have to do it even when you don't feel like it. It's really easy to write when inspiration strikes or sort of a sentence pops into your head, or you can just write it down, great stuff. But when you're just writing and you suddenly go, no, I've lost concentration, I don't want to do this anymore. There are a few things that really, really help me. Free writing is one of the things that I really love doing. It's great if I've got a complete block. And free writing is just, you say, right, I'm going to give myself 5 or 10 minutes and write whatever pops into my head. And it usually starts with, I can see a wall, it's grey, and then I can see a chair, and this is me, this is how I do it. And I'm looking around the room and there's all these different, and it really, really boring. And then suddenly I'll see something and it'll remind me of something. And then I'm writing about that. And then I've gone off on this, and I'm over here and I'm over there. And suddenly it's gone from I've got absolutely nothing to, and often it's all nonsense and unusable, but you might get one nice little description in there, or you might get one nice little, oh, that works. Or a characterization. You think, oh, that character, I should use that. That person I used to know, I should use them in something. Haha. And it can just take away that terrifying, empty, blank page that we all hate. Because it's just directly whatever's in your head, you put it down, and it just gets you moving. And after doing 1 or 2 of those, I can usually find, right, I've got a thread of something. I've got something. I also make sure I keep notes so that when those flashes of inspiration happen, I use notes in my phone so that it's always with me. I'll wake up in the middle of the night and think, oh, that character should have that happen to them. And I write it down straight away. Always write it down straight away. I always think I'll remember it. I never remember it. I'll think, yeah, great plot point. What was that? I've completely forgotten it. So get things written down, get things on a page, even if they're nonsense. Don't try and do it perfectly. Don't wait for the perfect line to pop into your head. Just start writing. When I used to write essays for uni, I used to start in the middle. I'd come back and do introduction because I could never do that first perfect line, and I didn't, so I'd start in the middle, and I didn't. I did even more. If I had to write an essay on Jane Eyre, I'd think, right, well, I've got to write about this particular thing, but what if Darth Vader were in Jane Eyre? I'll write about Darth Vader visiting Jane Eyre at home and how that's going to work. And I'd start writing it. And as I was starting writing it, I'd start thinking, okay, actually the essay question is a little bit relevant. I do know about this. I do know my stuff. I can apply it to something else. So it's playing with stuff, not expecting to write exactly what you want to write when you want to write it. Just write. Find that, get yourself into a rhythm of writing. I also use starter sentences, and you can just Google starter sentences, so they can be, all sorts of ideas. It could be, I didn't mean to kill him. And then you start writing whatever pops into your head, and you can create a stupid story, a clever story, no story at all. It can just be a description of something. So it's just about trying to get your ideas out and onto a page, and then thinking about the form later, because when you've got that block, you've got to find a way past it. The rest of it will come once you've done that.
So is it about, from what I'm hearing, are you saying that it's about structuring and routining when you write?
Yeah, it's about,
even if nothing's coming.
Yeah, it's about learning to write even when you don't want to. Even when it's not there, even when you don't have that. Because there are days I wake up and think, I want to spend 20 hours today writing, brilliant, and I'll sit down and I will literally sit at a computer until I fall asleep, and I don't want to eat and I don't want to drink, and it's great. And there are other days when I just think, oh, I don't want to. And you've got to have that sort of push yourself through those times. If I've got the time to write, that's a precious thing. I can't waste it. And finding there's lots of different techniques. There are books on techniques as well, and you may find something in them. Can't think of any titles, but if you Google them, which give lots and lots of writing exercises. And again, Google will give you writing exercises that can just help you, and there'll be one that suits you. Other things may not. Some people do sort of mind maps, start writing a character and then who they are and what they are and what's going to happen. Do the same thing for the plot. Think about doing all those and then work to the story after that. I can't work like that at all. It drives me insane. But you find what suits you and you find what works for you. Try all the different things and then you get there.
I was talking as part of this conference with Sarah Jane Critchley the other week, and she's taken up art as part of lockdown. Every Sunday she tries to paint something, and every Sunday at about 5 o'clock we get the oh my god message. It's going to be rubbish, I can't do this. And we've learned, and every week I say to her now, you're half an hour away from breaking through and mastering this. It's always the oh my god, I can't. It's just the last little bit, isn't it, before you get to something brilliant.
Absolutely. I think that's the thing that drives you, is that sudden and often that feeling, that one there, that's the bit that's really creative. That's the bit that all your good stuff comes from. If you're feeling really happy and really chilled and really relaxed, where's the tension? Where's your art coming from? You have to feel a little bit uncomfortable, I think.
Well, it's pushing yourself to the edge, isn't it?
It is.
Where the most creative space is.
Definitely.
Somebody says here, so within your talks, you talked about the way that you perceive the world in a very sensory way, the way that your senses are heightened. You very powerfully talked about how we only ever talk about those things in negative ways, but that actually we don't talk about the fact that your experiences are so much more enriched and more intense than perhaps people that don't experience the world in such a sensory way or to such intensity. And someone says here, how do you convert your 3D sensory idea into a linear story? Do you tend to start with a character or a feeling rather than a linear storyline?
Yeah, I never start with a linear story. I'm one of those writers who I have to write the story to find out what's going to happen. And that's one of the reasons I keep writing it, which can be problematic because you'll get to a point and go, no, this doesn't work. I need to go back and find another route through. So you can end up sort of going around the houses and having to rewrite things more. But I will usually start with a character, or with an idea of a character. I won't know what they look like. I'm not always sure if they're male or female yet. I don't know who they are, but I get a sense of their character and what sort of person they are. And then I have an idea of sort of the setting, and I start with that and I build from that. So it is very sensory what I'm doing. I'm getting sort of an idea of a scene, and as I write, it fleshes out. And as I write, I'm getting sort of, oh, it smells like that, and it feels like that, and it's that temperature, and there's all these things happening, and these colours are there. That's definitely, yeah, that's absolutely right. This person would see those colours. And, you know, and I'm building them up from that situation. I can't do the linear thing. People who say, well, I've got this story and I want to put it down. No, not at all. So as I'm writing, they start doing this and they start doing that, and other characters might appear, and it builds up, and each thing that happens is sparking ideas. So I'm using it all to drive. So everything that's happened, I'm using, but also the sensory side of that. So I'm thinking, oh, well, there's that's happened, and I can feel like, no, that there was this sound, and that's driven off this, and so creating that from the image or from the ideas or from the senses of it seems far richer to me than the story. The story's great, the story's brilliant, and you need a good story. That has to happen. But stories are pretty formulaic. There are rules to stories, and you can learn the rules to stories and the stages. This should happen here, and this should happen here, and this should happen here, have some conflict here, resolved over here, everyone's happy ever after over here. And that you can sort of learn and go through it. But how you get there, that's the bit I want to read. Yeah. I'm somebody who reads books over and over, the same books. There are some books I've read, probably 30 or 40 times, because I love the telling of the story. I know what's going to happen. That's not relevant. I want to hear how they're going to get there. I want to have to visualize it. I want to really enjoy the experience of getting to the end. And so, yeah, no full plan.
And I think that's maybe the mistake that's sometimes made in sometimes in modern storytelling, going from the sublime to the ridiculous in soap opera, for example, is what I think's forgotten is that if the audience really invests in the character, believes in the character, cares about the character, if that character stubs their toe, they care about it.
Yes.
You know, it doesn't have to be a massive crisis. It can be the smallest thing. It's about whether
you don't want them to go through a massive crisis because you care about them.
Yeah.
They can, as you say, they can go through something relatively minor and you can empathize with them, and that's fine. It's the story, it's how they're talking about it, how they're interacting with people. That's the interesting bit.
And as you say, if the story comes from the character, then you're gonna be on that journey with them, aren't you?
Yeah.
If it's just, I think sometimes things are much too plot led, and the character isn't well drawn enough.
Yeah.
And you end up watching things or reading things and thinking, I don't care about this person. It's irrelevant what happens to them.
Thinking about well drawn, one of the things I always have to do is go back and actually, once I've decided what they look like, put it in. And occasionally I have done it where I've decided they look like this, and then later on I've reimagined them completely and not realised, and gone back to where I was and oh no, they don't look like that. Stop, rewrite all of this. This isn't who they are. I've made a complete mistake with this person.
Yeah. But then it has a thread of integrity.
Yes.
And people buy into it then. Yeah,
it's about their personality. It's about them as in here rather than out there.
And linking onto this, if you don't mind me chucking my own questions in, forgive me, but I'm fascinated, is the talking about sensory environment. For the last 6 months or so, I've been trying to write, and I've managed here and there. I've been writing songs, particularly for some music things I've got coming up. And I found in the first 3 months of this year, I was doing a lot of train journeys, and I was writing a lot on the train. But in my house, where there are people and comings and goings, I can't. Is there a certain sensory environment that you need, or a certain solitude perhaps that you need in order to create?
Yes, ideally, I am alone at home. It is a nice day, but not too hot. Everything is comfortable. The farmers aren't doing anything on their tractors. There's nothing loud outside. Everything is nice and calm, and I am settled. And then I can there's no distractions, or all the distractions that are there are positive ones. So all the sensory environment is good and soothing. The bird songs all being right. They're not being too loud. Everything's being as it should be is the ideal. I think sensory environment is really, really important. Sometimes I do resort to using the noise cancelling headphones, and they help, but that sense of solitude is what I'm really seeking. It's not necessarily a literal solitude, it's the sense of it. It's the idea that I really am alone and I can just completely go into my head. Because part of the problem is when you've got your head buried in a story, untangling it, being distracted by the real world, having somebody come in and say, do you want a cup of tea? Well, yeah, that's really nice of you, but now I've been dragged out of where I was, and I was in the middle of writing something and I've lost that thread. And so keeping that sort of being able to work to my own rhythms without distractions really, really helps me. Which is one of the reasons I've struggled with being creative lately.
Yeah, and I can relate to that. Moving on to another question from our Fab members. Someone says here, what work did you do before your diagnosis? You mentioned that you'd worked with young autistic people. When and where was this?
I did. I've done that sort of classic autistic woman thing of having loads and loads and loads of different jobs. So I've worked in payroll and HR and libraries and outdoors in sort of bird reserves and all sorts of little things all over the place. And then I worked in my mid-20s. I ended up, just by chance, it was just by chance, I'd worked volunteering with a respite group when I was even younger, supporting autistic children having respite care during the summer holidays. But I was young and foolish then, but then I ended up working in mainstream schools supporting autistic teens. Just no experience of it really, just ended up in the job, and it was really hard and really rewarding. And I just went, this is possibly the most amazing job I've ever had. And there were these, autistics of 15, 16-year-old lads. And I thought, oh, yeah, you guys, let's find other ways of doing things. And I found I was really good at it. So I was coming up with these really inventive ways. You know, one of them was a real visual learner, incredible artist, but really struggled with writing and was really struggling with retaining any information. But if he drew things, they stuck straight away, like instantly. So I went, yeah, we'll just draw everything. Job done.
It's incredible, isn't it, how simple that response is, and how much education struggles with that concept.
Yes.
A child communicates through drawing. Let him draw. It's not Nobel Peace Project stuff, and yet it is, isn't it? Because people are still trying to put circles into square holes, aren't they?
Exactly. It was really the sort of expectation. I remember one of the teachers coming up to me after a test saying, "What did you do?" And I said, "Why?" He went, "Oh, he got a D in a test." And I went, "Oh, sorry." And he went, "No, he's never had a grade before. What did you do?" He's retaining knowledge. I said, "Well, just let him do what suited him." And I was, chatting to these kids, and they were going, "Wow, this communicating is really easy with them. It's really straightforward. They just say." They just say what they want, and then you can give it to them or not, depending on the situation, but they're clear. And I had autism training, which solidified what autism was, and I definitely wasn't that. These are...
Was there any of you that was thinking, I get this, I relate to their...
I relate to this hugely. I was thinking our communication is really, really easy. I'm struggling to see any communication disorder here. I'm struggling to see any communication difference here. Because of the training, it didn't occur to me that I was autistic. I think that was, I'd already had a couple of things. So my synesthesia, which is where my senses sort of mix up numbers. It's really helped with numbers. I was always very, very good at maths because all numbers are shapes for me. And when I looked that up, that's only found, or in 99% of cases, that's found in autistic people, and only about 1% non-autistic people. It's one of the rarer forms. And I went, "Oh, right, okay, so I'm in the 1%. Yay, go me." And then when I was working with autistic teens, I was like, "Well, this communication is really, really easy. I'm great at my job. Go me." And it hadn't occurred to me. It's not, I'd never met an autistic woman. I'd never heard of an autistic woman. I'd never heard an autistic woman speak. It was so far from my experience of autism. Thinking back, there were definitely autistic girls in that class without a diagnosis, with a different diagnosis, without a doubt. But it never would have occurred to me to think that they were autistic. It's really, really interesting how our own prejudices hold us back. And so I never think badly of anybody who doesn't understand autism, because I didn't. We all come from a place of ignorance. We all have to start there. It's only if you listen, if you're listening and if you don't listen, if people are telling you things and you're not listening, that's the problem. Until you've been told things, how are we supposed to know?
And sometimes that whole, as we mentioned, the whole depressive meltdown thing, sometimes it's hard to forgive yourself for some of the ignorances that you might have had 15, 20 years ago.
Completely.
And I think we have to forgive others sometimes. I think there's a difference between intent and not knowing.
Yes. Once somebody's been told, once it's been explained to somebody, if they sort of carry on with their prejudices and their stereotypes and their ideas that it's like this, and they've got to take some ownership of that. But if nobody's been told, if nobody's explained to them, well, why should they know? Doesn't mean they can't be kind, doesn't mean they shouldn't be understanding, but why should they know?
And you're only ever acting on the knowledge you have at the time, I suppose.
Exactly. It's all any of us can do. And I learned so much. And it wasn't until I read an article written by an autistic woman when I was in the early 30s that it finally clicked. And going back, it's now I can easily see, when I worked with them, that's why I was so good at my job. Because I could understand them really easily. Other people couldn't. And that was all a part of that. What I was then trying to communicate to other people, they were like, "Oh, right, well, we hadn't thought of that." And I think, why haven't you thought of that? This seems really obvious. And going back again, and as you say, we do beat ourselves up. These were the points where I could have spotted it. These are the points where I could have helped myself and that would have been the beginning of my journey. But no, I was too stuck in this rigid idea of what this was, and it wasn't that. I've got empathy, I've got kids, I'm married, I'm a woman. None of those things are autistic
Yeah.
traits. Yeah, they are.
But also that makes victims of us also, because that whole lack of understanding and very medicalized deficit model stuff
Yeah,
is sort of internalized anyway, isn't it?
it
And
is.
so we're victims of that, and I guess everybody's process is breaking through that and reaching a place of that understanding that it's never a Valhalla that any of us get to easily, and
Yeah.
it's a continual process, isn't it? And the people we are today is going to be very different to the people that we are in 10 years' time.
Completely. I'll stop processing when, last day of my life, that's the end of it.
Yeah.
That's when I'm finished. That's when I've finished actually working out who I am and how I'm going to be and how I'm going to interact with the world. And I think it's so important that we do realize who we are, because there's all this masking nonsense that goes on. Masking's useful. Masking has been really useful to me at times, and it's something that helps being able to hide who I am, being able to communicate successfully with other people. It's helpful, but my goodness, it's taken its toll.
Yeah.
The price has been way too high.
Was something that came up, and I really thought about it, and I thought I don't really relate to this. And then I was speaking to a friend of mine, our mutual friend Dawn, who we both very well through Twitter. I know very well in real physical world, although not at the moment. But she said to me, I said to her, I don't think I mask, Dawn, and she'd known me a few years by this point, and she said, oh no, you do. She said, but you've been doing it for so long that you don't notice anymore. She said, I can see it happening to you, but you don't know you're doing it. It's become so ingrained that whenever I'm with any other humans, I'm just a slightly different version of the authentic me. I'm the presentable version, or I have a slight
delay. There's a slight distance. I'll hold you there.
Yeah, absolutely.
There we are.
And I often think you often don't know you're masking until you've finished.
Yeah.
And then that was knackering.
Absolutely. And all of that. And then you feel, well, why did I do that? And then you can spiral again. Why did I do that? I didn't have to mask. Why did I do that? I wouldn't be so tired if I hadn't done that. And it probably would have been fine. But you can't, as you say, it's this automatic thing. And I've had so many, I'm working on dismantling the mask. But you put me into a situation where I don't know the people, I'm in a new space, I'm, uncomfortable, and you'll see it.
It's survival.
Solidify around me like a cocoon.
Yeah. And if you've lived in a world that tells you that you've got to be like everybody else, it's very hard to dismantle that. If you've done it from the beginning, to then suddenly say, I'm going to whip this mask off now completely, it's not easy to do. And I met a teenage autistic girl a couple of years ago, and I was talking about masking, and she said, Dean, I'm 14, and I want to take my mask off, but my fear is I don't know who's under there. Because she'd done it for so long that she didn't know who the authentic person was anymore. She'd played this character that it had become her.
Yeah. So hard. It's so hard, and it's such a multi-layered personal thing. And it's all down to the expectations put on autistic people. It's all down to the communication saying, here is the normal. This is how you must communicate. And if you do it like this, you're wrong. And it's forced into you on every level of society. You might have parents who are completely understanding and who completely let you be yourself at home, but then you go out and it's this and it's that. And, there's no guarantee that the rest of the world is going to be kind to you. It's a way of protecting yourself. It's a way of being undercover. It's a way of communicating successfully with people who are unable to meet you halfway, because all the work has to be done by the autistic person. It's like, you've got the social processing condition, you do the work. Hang on. If I've got the social processing condition, shouldn't you do the work? Isn't that the way it's supposed to work? Isn't that the way round it should be?
Well, it's funny, isn't it? I've been reading Neurotribes recently, which I should have got around to much longer ago, but I'm reading it at the moment. And what seems to come through there for me is that historically, and I think it's going to happen again with this crisis we're in, is that historically the world gets itself into a mess, and again, autistic people come up with ways of solving the mess, and very often come up with forms to communicate. The internet, radio, again and again, we're the ones fixing the social world, for the people that supposedly are supposed to be able to do it instinctively.
So very true. Excellent point.
And I wonder, I'm just waiting. I think the solution to this whole crisis is going to come from an autistic brain.
It's got to be somebody who sees the next step, who sees outside of what is there. You've got to have, this idea of autistic people not being imaginative. Ha!
Oh, some of the most creative, some of the most creative, imaginative, because we will look at the world from completely different angles.
Completely. And you don't see the whole world unless you listen to every angle, every neurodivergency, every single person is seeing an aspect of the world that other people aren't seeing. And I want to hear those. I want to see the whole world. And for me, that means listening to as many people as possible. This idea that here is my view, job done. It seems so small and boring.
You want your view to slot in amongst all the others and make something bigger.
Exactly. That's the only way you really get to see everything, and you really get to understand everything. And that's how we get to these amazing advances, is you get the people who are seeing that a little bit further, seeing things that next step. Yeah.
A few years ago, I was booked in to do a session with a film company, and I thought it was just part of their neurodiversity week. We'll have this guy in, knock that off the budget and say that we've done neurodiversity. But I went in, and the guy who'd booked me said, Dean, the reason we've got you here is because we're actively seeking more autistic creatives, because our non-autistics have run out of ideas. And we've come to the conclusion that if we want different ideas, we need different brains to think them. I thought, at last, we're at this precipice of, but it hasn't come to anything yet that I know of. But the desire was there, and people are starting to realise that if you want new ideas, you need to go to different brains to the ones you've normally been going to.
Absolutely. There's so many. There's got to be so many undiagnosed autistic people in the creative industries already, and we just need to actually get to a point where being autistic is not in any way not associated with being creative. They are not mutually exclusive. I'm saying that really badly.
No, it comes across perfectly clearly. And I also think it's important to point out that very often, I do a lot of work in schools for children with learning difficulties and severe learning difficulties in the modern terminology anyway. And very often those children by society are written off as not being creative at all. And you can see creativity and imagination oozing through, that the way they interpret the world is so intense, and you can see that, and the imagination, the creativity, and it's hugely overlooked because society is waiting for a certain kind of creativity to be delivered.
Absolutely, and it has to be communicated verbally, and it has to be communicated in a way that the normal can understand, and it has to be completely accessible and right there and given to me and handed to me. It can't be something, this beautiful new way of thinking, this beautiful, utterly astonishing. Yeah, absolutely. I could not agree more that we are so narrow in how we think of artists.
And so perhaps the problem we have is that the non-autistic world isn't creative enough in their thinking.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, I think they're not creative enough to actually think about creativity.
Yeah, absolutely. We're whizzing through these questions. We've got a few more. So there's a few questions here that link together. So I'll ask them all in one. People have asked, who were your influences growing up? Who do you admire the most? And who is your role model?
Oh, so many people. I couldn't possibly choose one person for all of those things. I love so many, for me at the moment, all these autistic women who are doing amazing things, like Catriona Stewart with the Scottish Women's Autistic Network.
I love Catriona.
Incredible. Sarah Hendricks.
Got her OBE, I could have danced around the house. I was so happy.
Absolute final recognition. Sarah Hendricks, who's the first autistic woman I ever heard speak, and who told me to start writing a blog. It's all her fault. Who is just so funny, so clever. So she gets stuff across in such a gentle way. It's absolutely brilliant. Catherine May and Laura James, autistic writers, absolutely phenomenal. And then I'm a bit of a comedy geek. So I really like my stand-up comedy and things. Kate Fox and Hannah Gadsby. So Kate Fox, who does poetry as well.
Yeah, I've worked with Kate. She's fab. She really is.
brilliant, amazing dresses as well. I'm always really jealous of all the
hair.
And hair. And Hannah Gadsby, who is a comedian, who just incredible, hilarious, brilliant. So those are people who I admire, but also just anybody who shares their experience. So you, Dean, anybody.
I was hoping.
Anybody who puts themselves out there, puts their own experience and takes that and shares it with the world. That's not a small thing to do. It's not small, it's not insignificant, and it is changing the world, and it's so vital. And I have the utmost admiration for anybody who does that in the hopes of making the world a better place. It's because it does, even if you're only changing a few people here and there, you are changing the world, and it's such a powerful thing.
And I think in both of our cases, I think it's always important to remember that the headway that we make provides shoulders for the next set of feet to stand on.
Exactly. I want the young people growing up now to have everything I didn't. I want them to be understood. I want them to feel heard. I want them to be able to look at, I want young girls to be able to look at women, autistic women, and say, that's me, I'm like her. Not to have to go through life feeling really alone, really alone in who you are, and wondering, where are my tribe? Where are my people? I don't understand any of this. I don't understand any of these people. I'm going to force myself into the box of trying to be like them in an attempt to fit in, but this is not who I am, and this is always going to be uncomfortable, and I'm always going to have to reach for a reaction that isn't natural. I'm always going to be not me. And that's because that's a horrible burden to put on anyone. I think, well, growing up, my influences were, I loved reading, I love stories, and I love adventures. And I think my favourite book was Ronja the Robber's Daughter by Astrid Lindgren, who did all the Pippi Longstocking books.
Oh, yes.
And so you had this amazing, strong character of Ronja, and she argued with her father about what was right, and she always did what was right, and she went and she fought monsters, and she did it all herself. And it was this idea that you can be strong as a girl, and you can be tough, and you can run barefoot through the woods with your wild, messy hair. I don't know. I'm certainly modelling myself more and more on her. But I was really lucky growing up that I had, one of the reasons I probably ended up a writer, as well as always loving stories, was I had a brilliant English teacher when I was about 15. And I used to take my poems to her. I didn't show anyone else my poems, but I'd take my poems to her and she'd read them. She'd say, oh, they're very good. And I'd go away. And one day I went to her and I said, can you give me any advice on writing my poems? Because I want to get better. And she said, no, I can't. And I said, oh, all right, that's a bit rude. And she said, because I can't do what you can do. And having a grown up say that to me at that age was so powerful, because I felt very alone. I felt like I was getting everything wrong. Like my whole world was really, really hard. And then there was this one person who said, I can't do that. That is special. And that really helped me. That really lifted me. I don't think anybody realizes how one person believing in you so completely, the strength of that, the power of that, and how they remember. And
how one sentence can shape the path that you go on.
Exactly. And so I was quite the stereotypical autistic, probably, because I love my science and I love my maths and I love my logic and I loved all of that. And then I love my English and I love my art as well. So that was and science and maths, that was easy. That was straightforward. I really liked that. Art and English was complicated and difficult because there was no right and wrong answer. It made me feel uncomfortable, but it also sparked something. And so I ended up going down that route. Should have been an engineer. Life would have been a lot simpler. And
you'd never have taught a play as an engineer.
I would never have taught a play. And as for role models, I think my biggest role model is a friend of mine who, I'm not going to say her name, but she's an autistic woman, and we only met as adults, and we've talked about our experiences. And up until the age of 10, we have really similar experiences of our childhood. Then at the age of 10, when we were really realizing that people are weird and odd and really we didn't fit in and they were difficult to communicate with, we took really different trajectories. So she went down the route of sod them. I can't speak the way they want me to speak. I can't be who they want me to be. I'll just be myself. And I went down the route of, I'm going to learn to mask. I'm going to learn how they work. I'm going to study people. I'm going to perfect my system. I'm going to really, really work on who I am, change who I am to try and fit in, because I want to fit in. I want to make sense in the world. And so I went down the route of learning to mask, and all of the sort of difficulties that has led. Not that she hasn't had her own difficulties with not masking, but she is exactly who she is in every different situation. She is always herself. And I am hugely respectful of that. And that's what I want to be as I get older. I want to get closer and closer to being me wherever I am. At the moment, as Dean was saying about that mask that just pops up when you don't want it to be, when, I want that to go away. I want that not to be a thing anymore, Dean. I want it always to be me. And as time goes on, I really, really, I want to unpeel all those layers of masking and work out what I am in the middle. And I want to be that to the best of my ability.
Although I think what comes through in your work, that authenticity, is the core you anyway. I mean, who am I to know? But it must be, because it comes from the heart. And so I don't think you should underestimate that it isn't concealed behind any pretense. It's all very real and true, and that's why it's so powerful. And I wonder, do you feel yourself arriving at the island of Sodom?
Yeah, definitely. As I get older and older, in my 20s, I was very wanting to fit in, wanting everything to be right, wanting to understand people, them to understand me. In my 30s, I became less and less interested in other people and a bit more, hang on a minute, who am I? How am I reacting to this? This is relevant. Who I am is important. If this is hurting me, that is a thing. That's not something I should just be going, oh, it's not relevant if it's me.
Yeah.
And in my 40s, I intend to keep heading down that line towards, sod them. I'm going to be me, and that's fine.
And I'm going down exactly the same track. And our final question, it's a lovely way to finish, is if you had one wish, what would it be?
So many choices, you go with world peace and all these things, but I have read so many stories where you have one wish and it goes horribly, horribly wrong. And I sort of feel, if I have one wish and I wish for it, that's just going to end up in an absolute disaster. But I think if I had one wish and it was absolutely going to come true and it was going to be as I want it to be, I would wish that everybody became bilingual in the different communication methods, or multilingual in the different communication methods, that everybody truly understood how other people communicated and they could speak in that language to those people, and that you could recognize those patterns, and that we could communicate on our own terms, each and every one of us, that the world really understood what it meant to be neurodivergent, what it meant to be autistic, that we're not scary and we're exactly as human. We have all those same pains and fears. We just have slightly different ways of doing things and slightly different wiring to how we work. I would love it if the world truly understood what autism was and get away from this awareness. I'm aware Papua New Guinea exists. I haven't been there. I don't know anything about it. I'm aware of it. That's not the same thing at all. If I were to understand Papua New Guinea, I would go there, I would speak to the people, I would learn their language. There's lots of languages. I don't know why I've chosen that, Papua New Guinea. Terrible choice.
It's a wonderful name.
It is a wonderful name. But yes, that's what I would have. I would have that true understanding, so that we got rid of all these stereotypes, that everybody who needed to access diagnosis could access diagnosis, that everybody who needed that support could find their tribe and learn what it is to belong. Because when you go through life being alone, it's really, really hard. It's really, really hard to do anything, even the things you enjoy. It's really, really hard to function as a fully fledged human being. It's only when you understand who you are that you can find people like you, that you can really recognize that you're not alone, that you're a part of something bigger. And when it comes to autism, the entire spectrum of humanity is there. We are all so different. There are brilliant autistic people, there are awful autistic people, there are fabulous, horrible. We're not special. We're people. And any assumption you bring with you has to take that into account. At the moment, you have to be either inspiring or awful, and you can't be anything in between. You can't
Or
just
deserving of sympathy.
Deserving of sympathy, pity. Yeah, you've got to be pitiful in some way, or you've got to make them feel better, or you've got to make them feel better that they're not you, or there's all these different ways that we view it as different and other, and it's simply not true. It's just a lie people tell themselves to make themselves feel better about themselves. And it's only when that's completely gone that we're going to have true equality. And I want to see that, across the board.
And we'll get there. We will.
We will get there.
Slowly. And it has to be said that over the last few years, watching your work through the blogs and then into the theatrical tour, seeing the reaction to it from the autistic community, it was very clear to me that so many people felt they'd found their tribe because of your work as well. So never underestimate the power of that. It's massive. And may I suggest that if you were to do a follow-up to The Duck and she's a bit more angrier, can I suggest a title?
Yes.
I think you should call it The Whole World Needs to Duck Off. That's my suggestion. I won't even charge a royalty for that. You can have it.
Excellent suggestion. I'll work on it.
Thank you so much for joining us for this Q&A. Thank you for your fantastic films across the week. Thank you so much to everybody that sent questions in. Yeah. Thank you for joining us on this conference. They have been, haven't they? Thanks for joining us on this conference. It continues right through to the end of the month, so keep tuning in every day. Stay safe, everybody, and take care.